back to another episode of Covered with the Utah FOP. I am your host, Brett Rawson, and this is our second of a couple of episodes in a row where we've had Mary Kent from UVU was here last episode talking to us about her program dealing with intelligence analysts and the opportunity that exists for students who might have an interest, a law enforcement or even a national security interest in learning how to be an open source intel analyst. And I was just fascinated by it. I introduced our guest, Tyler Clancy, who is here with us last hour, but I want to do it again. I want to do a better job. You're with the Provo Police Department, but at some point, you got the great big idea that you wanted to come be a House representative, which I think required an election, if I understand everything correctly here. That's not just something you go out and fill out an application and you're in. You had to go and campaign, right? So you did that and things went your way, and now you are Utah's representative from District 60. Tyler, where does District 60 encompass?
District 60 is in Provo. It's just a small town just south of here. If you've ever heard of that.
I've heard of Provo. Yes, I have. Matter of fact, some hard time in Provo.
Yeah, hard time.
Yep.
No, it goes from kind of stretches downtown Provo by the rec center all the way up on the East Bench, kind of close to Timpview High School. So.
Okay. About how many people in your district?
This
is a quiz. Now you have to know everything about your district, the names of all of the CEOs of every company inside of your jurisdiction. No, I'm just kidding.
And cut. No, no, it's ironically, it's actually a pretty interesting district because there's so many students there.
Yeah.
And so the population
up and down,
literally the time of day can change by 30,000.
Encompasses all of BYU.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but not UVU. That's in Orem, right?
Nope. Yep.
Okay.
Just BYU.
Just BYU. All right. So got to be a Cougar fan to be.
That's right. Bleed blue.
Okay.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yeah. When I say I back the blue, it's actually two different.
Double entendre.
Speaking to two audiences.
Royal and
Yep. I love it. I
think all of us at the table, and there's Travis sitting over in the corner.
Yeah.
Wearing his royal blue.
Yeah.
For being a Ute fan, he's wearing royal blue.
He got the memo.
See, I told you, back the blue, you're covered.
We're all wearing
just
the
doing
right
a Y with his hands.
Is that what that was? It was a gesture.
Yeah.
It was definitely a gesture. I don't think it was quite complete, but definitely a Cougar fan. Did, like I said, some very hard time in Provo as a youngster, and spent some time at BYU. Ended up getting a grad degree there. So had children in Happy Valley. So I'm familiar with your district. Why in the world would a successful police officer such as yourself take it upon themselves, other than hearing this show and how many times we have begged, pleaded, requested, asked with love all of the officers to consider what it is that you found yourself doing? What was it in you that you woke up one day and said, I'm going for this?
Yeah, so just prior to law enforcement, I served for a number of years as the executive director of an organization called the Pioneer Park Coalition. Now it's called Solutions Utah. But we focused on kind of the nexus of public safety, homelessness, and kind of the just a vibrant economy and how those interplay with each other. So I spent several years in the public policy arena trying to influence policy from the outside and just seeing how challenging it is sometimes. And then obviously, as a police officer, being passionate about public safety, being passionate about protecting our public employees, things like that. I found that it's not always easy to influence policy from the outside. And so when the opportunity arose, there was a couple of people who had lined up to run, and I thought I offered something unique to the race. It's the youngest legislative district. And so I said, you know what better way to at least move the needle, move the conversation than to jump in and do it. So
how was your, and I hope if we get in trouble asking these questions, we can just cut this out, but how was your administration at work with the idea of you doing something like this?
That's a phenomenal question. So the short answer is great.
That was the right answer, by the way.
Yeah, we can keep that in.
Yeah.
No, Chief Troy Beebe and Mayor Kafusi. So when I decided that this was something that I was going to pursue, I reached out to them pretty quickly, and I asked the chief, and he said, "Well, that's an interesting question. No one's ever asked that, especially a junior officer. So let me run it by the mayor. And both of them kind of came back and said, thumbs up, you go for it. Why not? And then when I got elected, I think they were both surprised, as was I. And so everyone was like, well, great. Well, now let's figure this out. Yeah.
Like Trump in 2016. What do you mean? Now what?
Woke up. Oh, yeah.
Well, fantastic. And so tell us about, how long have you been in now at this point? I know we're here in middle of December 2023 recording this, but so by the time the listeners hear this in January,
we'll be gearing up for a session in next week.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be about a year. So I was inaugurated in the first day of the legislative session in January of 23. So the election was in the winter of 22.
Okay.
And then sworn in January.
So at the time that our listeners will be hearing this, you will have been in a year.
Mm-hmm.
Anything what's the most surprising aspect of being a lawmaker in Utah?
I think, and I would say probably not just from the legislative standpoint, but really from that same public policy standpoint, is I think so many times we discount our experiences, as, well, I'm a police officer, I'm not involved in government, or I'm in business, I'm not involved in this, and we silo ourselves. But really, when you go up there and you observe that legislative body, everyone has diverse and unique experiences, and your whatever that experience is, specifically today pertaining to law enforcement, you have a role to play. And so I think just seeing how just sharing something that you or I might think is commonplace, like, yes, fentanyl exists. It's very common. We pull it out of people's pockets pretty often. And people, what? Are you serious? And so just being able to share those experiences and seeing how you can move the needle, I think, I hope it would give others something to think about and say, maybe there is something I can bring to the table.
What are you working on up at the Hill these days? I mean, we're coming into 2024. The session will be open not too far away, distant future here. What is on the agenda?
Well, what is this, 2-hour podcast? No.
Yeah.
Now, I'll really quickly looking at a lot of mental health crisis. I think pretty much every, at least urban center and even in rural Utah, we've seen people in our community who are dealing with severe and persistent mental illness. They're constantly involved in the criminal justice system. They're constantly in that crisis mode, putting other people at risk, putting themselves at risk, standing in the middle of the road at 4 a.m. and screaming on a busy highway, things like that. Finding out the answer of how can we best help them and help the community at the same time. So looking at some things there. Focusing on victims, I think, for a long time, and a big reason why I wanted to jump in was I felt like and obviously this is my opinion, but I feel like for the past several years, we've really focused on offenders and in the criminal justice system, and how is their life going to be impacted by incarceration, or how is their life going to be impacted by this sentence? When I talk to people in my community and knocking on doors, hearing the life-shattering impacts that being a victim of a violent crime or sexual assault or rape, those are the things I don't feel like are quite as discussed. And so making sure that victims feel like they are given respect in the system, and so they're more confident in reporting, they're more confident in testifying and things like that. And so I think you'll see some movement there as well.
It's not surprising to me that you would be involved in thinking about victims. So many of the good people of law enforcement that get involved in law enforcement are because they don't like bullies. They want to make a difference. They care about victims. They want to be a positive influence in their lives. But I also can't imagine that because you are an active sworn law enforcement officer that's going, I'm assuming you're going on duty every day. You're at patrol?
Just got off this morning.
Okay. So, all right. Yeah. And you're wide awake. Fantastic.
Well, wide is strong.
Yeah. I would imagine that your colleagues at the Capitol, that they're going to approach you, if they haven't already, about issues pertaining specifically to law enforcement. Has that happened? And if so, what are you guys talking about? What's new as it relates to law enforcement initiatives?
Yeah, well, I'll preface, and I always do with my colleagues, is that just because, if someone owns a small business, they're not the end all be all resource on every business policy or tax, incentive. And the same thing goes, and I always preface, I say, oh, I can share with you my experience, and I can connect you with people who have, maybe they're a prosecutor, maybe they're a defense attorney, or someone who's a victim advocate. And so for me, I think it's also being a resource to, branch out. And so not just giving my opinion that's correct, but rather sharing my experience. And that's how I always talk about that. I think you'll see, if you look back, and we can go down the list here, I'll just use Book as an example. The man who murdered Aaron Lowe, the University of Utah football player. If you talk to any police officer at Unified Police or at Salt Lake City Police, it was not a surprise when he murdered someone. He had been arrested several times for a litany of crimes ranging the span, and the one prior to murdering Aaron Lowe, he robbed a father and daughter at gunpoint over an iPhone and put a gun to someone's head. He wrote a letter to the judge and said, "I apologize, I won't do it again," and he was let out with a promise to appear. Some of the things that we're seeing in our society and are so head-scratching and say, how could this possibly happen? When you get to the core of it, it's not a surprise at all. So I think you are going to see some movement on bail reform, making sure that we're prioritizing public safety over someone's convenience, and making sure that there's accountability in our system.
Can I ask a question?
No. Nobody even knows who you are.
That was in the contract. He can't,
because I forgot to tell everybody you were here. So we have Brent Jex,
That's
Executive Director of the Utah FOP, and El Presidente Kevin Murray of the Utah State Lodge of the Fraternal Order of Police. Yes, in the house.
And I appreciate the L for my mustache. I was told that I look a little bit Latino.
The flow.
That's fantastic.
So on some of these reform, I mean, part of the problems that we have, and we've talked at length, and I think I would look at Tyler as one of the up and comers. I keep telling him, start getting the measurements for that corner office, because it won't surprise me one day to see him on the ballot for that office. But the problems and issues with district attorneys and county attorneys, and the issues of this absolute immunity. And one of the things that's always perplexed me on it is that officers making the split-second decisions have the qualified immunity, which means, we may cover you, we may not. But these prosecutors that can sit on, take critical incidents, for example. And we've talked at length about them, but they can sit on them for up to 5 years and no repercussions because the prosecutors enjoyed the absolute immunity. Part of that feels like it comes into play with the charging decisions and the decisions not to charge and things like that they just kind of do whatever they feel like, and there is no accountability except for at the ballot box. Is anything like that part of the discussions? Yeah,
and what you just outlined, you can imagine, I hear it every single day from not just the people I work with, but because, having a reputation of being in law enforcement or even adjacent to law enforcement, you're going to hear from constituents who are going to look you up and contact you with those concerns. I'll say two things. One is I want to give a shout out to Utah County Attorney Jeff Gray. I think one of the reasons that makes him such a stalwart in that office is he's been involved in several investigations when he was at the Attorney General's office, where he saw firsthand what those situations look like, and being able to be in proximity to the people who are running in, as we know, a lot of, civilians, and when the 911 calls out of someone with a knife at 2 a.m, someone's got to go. And that person that's got to go, there's so many things that are on their mind, their family, what's going to happen to my family, what's going to happen to me. Oh, I hope, it's not a fake knife or whatever, all these different things. And so I think one of the reasons that makes him a stalwart is being in that proximity. The second thing I'll say is on our radar this year, and you saw it last year, but there was some legislation to make all state employees at will. One of the challenges I think with that is looking at it from a private sector mindset. Maybe it makes sense. Maybe it makes dollars and cents. But when you look at a highway patrol officer, or even some of our DNR guys and gals that are out usually by themselves in the middle of the night, maybe hunting for poachers or whatever it might be, we want to make sure that when they have to make that split-second decision, they're doing it based on what's right and wrong. What's right or wrong for public safety, what's right or wrong for their safety. If we're second, third, fourth guessing that person to say, well, hold on, what county am I in? Is the DA up for re-election this year? Is he or she going to have to pivot? And am I going to be that,
official lamb?
Exactly. So those are two things that we're really watching this year to make sure that we don't put our officers in that bad position.
It's one thing that I've always seen is, somebody scared to do their job is never good to do their job. And so I appreciate those bills that you're working on. Having a little bit more protection instead of just saying, hey, I don't like what you did. You're out of here. Clean out your desk and go home.
Or trust us, I know the law says this, but trust us. We'll take care of you.
Yeah.
Famous last words.
So, Representative, what is your stance on due process for law enforcement officers? That was a softball, baby.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
T-ball.
Representative Anthony Lubay has some really important legislation this year. Obviously, in our constitutional system of government, when someone's accused of a crime, we all know that's not the end-all be-all. But for some law enforcement officers, specifically when we look at the profession and what it takes, that can be the scarlet letter. Just an accusation alone can sideline someone for years, can make them unhireable for that period of time. And the back part of that is there's a family at home. And I think for too long, police officers have taken the brunt of that as just kind of a shrug and say, well, that's just kind of how it is. We're looking to put Utah on the map as a leader and making sure that this is a destination place for people to come for law enforcement. One of those things, as you look at states of the growth and then the people leaving the profession, is are those laws structured in a way that they give the due process, not special benefits, but just the bedrock foundation that anyone would expect during a criminal or civil proceeding. So Representative Anthony Lubay is running that legislation to put in place specific state law, not just department policy, for that due process.
Well, and it's important, and he's been awesome. I like that guy.
Sharp, yeah, real sharp leader.
He's an attorney, right?
Don't hold it against him.
I was going to say, yeah. Were we really wanting to put him out there publicly like that?
Yeah. Careful. Maybe. Judgment call.
Yeah, he's out in Kearns, West Valley area, Magna.
Okay. Part of it that sticks in there, and I've had a chief or two tell me, I don't know why you guys want this, but I mean, we don't have a problem with this. And they said, well, can you vouch for all 229 police agencies in the state that all 229 do them correctly? They said, well, this is kind of a waste of time. I'm like, well, if you're already doing it, then you shouldn't have any need to oppose it.
Right.
And part of the bill is some basic due process in internal investigations, some protection and codification of garrity statements, and making sure that those stay private. And one element to it is that if an agency provides a statement to a prosecutor, a garrity protected statement to an officer or to a prosecutor, then it opens up not only the prosecutor to liability, but also the chief law enforcement officer of the agency to liability. Nothing to hide behind for the protections. And that's the only way that we could think of to get this in.
Skin in the game.
And also bringing in the issue of Brady, and that if you're going to have a Brady designation follow you, that has to go before a trier of fact.
Yeah, these are huge points that you're touching on just from a legal perspective. I'll take the first one first. Garrity, we take it for granted that if our agencies ask us to come in and provide a Garrity-derived statement, that's going to be protected. The problem with that is, let's say in some hypothetical crazy land that it takes 5, 6, 7 years to clear a guy for a shooting. I mean, I can't imagine where that would be. I was going to say,
where is crazy land? I've never heard of that.
But let's say that you're in that.
Let me look out the window.
That dynamic. the media has gone after these Garrity statements, and it's been made, very clear that, the statements, when they are requested by media, that's not for a criminal purpose. So now this, quote, protection, where you're believing as you give your Garrity statement that it's not going to end up in the hands of a prosecutor, that goes out the window. Because what do you think the media does with it as soon as they get it? Well, they print it. And now the prosecutor has what he or she should not, by operation of law, should not have had. That is a point of whiplash in the law that just desperately needs to be corrected. The Brady one is another interesting one. You Brady a cop, and for those of you that have been a cop, less than 30 seconds, I'll just speak to you for a minute. There is a requirement that the prosecution turn over any information that has any tendency to be exculpatory as it relates to defense. And included in that is this idea, and this is the giglio or the gilio, however you want to say
Giglio.
it. Okay, I know.
I was going to say it totally depends who you...
Ian's the one that was saying Giglio, and I wanted to slap him. But
I've never heard that.
And it might even be right, but I'm never going to say it that way.
Nope. Always Giglio.
But Giglio, that part of Brady that says, okay, if there's a problem with an officer's conduct, and it can just be an allegation, that has to be turned over. And that's they got to dive in and figure out what does it mean an allegation? Is it a sustained allegation? Is it just an allegation that's not sustained? Is it, what is it? And then the worst part of it, what is the due process to unwind that if it's found to not be a reasonable or legitimate allegation? Just because a prosecutor puts your name on a list, well, it may not appropriately be on that list.
Well, especially if the prosecutor will not tell the agency what the details are of the reasoning, so they can do an internal investigation.
A mess.
Egregious.
Yeah.
It is egregious. There's a vacuum in the law. It has to be addressed.
It's clarification, really.
Yeah. So those are those things come up, and they continue to come up. I've been doing this now for over 17 years, and this has consistently been, that hot spot that we don't have the tools to resolve because it really is a legislative fix.
And can I just say, as we talk about all these issues and speaking broadly, look across the country. What are the most unsafe places to be? It's places where police feel so hogtied by either the statutory laws or the leaders who they know are going to go after them. And the safe thing to do to be an officer on the beat there, stay in your car and look the other way. If you want to live in a city like that, there's plenty and we can point them out. But if you want public safety and you want people who are the best, the brightest, people who really care about their community and want to be jumping out of their cars, want to be talking, building those relationships with the community, making sure that they know the community well enough to know if something's off, if there's someone there that shouldn't be, all these different things. You've got to make sure that they know the community has their back. And that's what I will say, a big shout out to the FOP leadership, is that's what you are advocating for. That's kind of the to contextualize that for our listeners.
So as these issues come up, what's the general consensus with the other legislators? I know we've got legislators up there that aren't fans, and that's fine. I can't exactly say I'm a fan of theirs either. But what in the broad sense, what do legislators look at when it comes to public safety issues?
I would say the vast majority, and really even cutting across partisan lines, the vast majority know that we want robust public safety. We know we want police officers to feel supported in their jobs. The question is the what and the how, and how does that look? And that's why I say I really wanted to give you all a shout out that's where you're filling that gap, to bring in the how. Hey, we know what you want. We know we want safe communities. We know we want, here's how we can get there, and explaining the why. And so I think for a long time, because as we mentioned earlier, maybe in law enforcement, we think, well, that's politics. We hate those guys. Sure. But it's going to affect us. And so I think your advocacy, the public facing work that you've done has been able to fill that gap. And so I'm hopeful that just by bringing the how and the why, we can get across that bridge. Because for too long, it's been, the other groups that have been filling in those gaps.
What does your wife think about this dual role for you?
Yeah.
I think well, I will say it's funny. Everyone came to my wife after the election was like, it's going to be hard. You're not going to see your husband very much. And she's like, oh, I don't see him anyway. So no, it's, I really think, I'll tell you, as a pitch, I know you've said you've been begging and pleading, and I'll add to that beg and plead for law enforcement. And can I just give a shout out to Chris Roberts,
Please,
who just
absolutely.
ran in Harriman City Council and ran a phenomenal race with limited resources. Obviously, as a police officer, we don't have millions of dollars to throw into a race. I'll tell you, character. A good police officer is going to be someone of character. They're going to understand not just the law, but how to apply it. The second is that legal framework, just being able to read code, understand what fits, different words like may, shall. Those are nuts and bolts skills that will help you as a lawmaker, whether it's on the county, municipal, or state level. And then finally, just the ability to sit in a situation that's very hard, very complex. There's a lot of different relationships, different levers that are being pushed and pulled, victims and offenders, being in the same room and being able to sit there in a very uncomfortable situation and be decisive, make a decision and move on. Those are all skills that directly transfer to being an effective lawmaker, being an effective advocate at the public level. So I know a lot of times, we focus on firearms, on defensive tactics, all these different things, and say, well, I'm not going to be using that at the Capitol. There are so many transferable skills. And I would say if you're listening to this and you're thinking about it, go for it.
I think it's incredibly important if you're passionate about something to give it a shot. And I know, for many people, the idea of, well, maybe I won't win the election, is just so overbearing. But I got to say, I don't want to say it doesn't matter if you win or lose, because you fight to win, and we always fight to win, and you don't want to lose an election. But having campaigned in an election and lost an election once upon a time 10 years ago, and of course this was a special election, so it wasn't everybody. It was the Central Committee that was involved in electing. That was the Attorney General's race back we were campaigning in, what was it, November, December 2013. So it was over 10 years ago.
Okay.
Just the process of going through that and driving out to all of, I think I got to every county except one. I don't think I made it to Daggett. But just to be able to talk to people about their concerns, and they knew my background because I made it very clear. And when you're talking about law enforcement issues in somebody's living room, and you're expressing yourself as someone that you hope can make a difference about, a particular thing you're passionate about, they remember that. And even though I didn't win that, it kind of it went a long way to sort of set the foundation for or the platform for what other people began talking about shortly thereafter. And so I think it's always important to have your voice heard, and you can't have your voice heard if you're hiding in your house and you're not willing to express yourself. There's great value to all of us to have you guys and gals out there campaigning and advocating for the things that are important to you. And who knows, you might just win. Isn't that right? Right, Representative.
And with that, so like I've always been somebody that fear of failing has always been a massive crippling fear. But if you want something like to make a change and you don't run, you're failing there.
You're going to lose.
Either way, you're not making it. So giving it a try, learning, and if you lose, try again. It's not a big deal.
I think what's, and I'll just share this. I think one of the biggest, most important skills as a law enforcement officer going into a situation, you got to listen. That is a quality that is missing from public life. Everyone has an opinion. They want to share their hot take, of course. But I'll tell you, some of my most formative political opinions or passion comes from going to 7-Eleven and just listening to the cashier explain to me the different challenges she's facing, whether it's with kind of a benefit to say, You know what? She told me the other day, you know what? If I work 5 hours of overtime, I lose my childcare benefits with the state. So why would I work harder? Things like that. Those are the things that are missing. If you come in and just, everyone knows the prototypical RoboCop that comes in, starts knife handing everyone. We got a lot of that
Citizen.
up there. Yeah. You're right. I'm wrong. If you can just be that listener, sometimes that's really what people want. Sitting on someone's couch and explaining to them how their life's been turned upside down by a violent crime or by a sexual offense, all these different things, just to sit there. Sometimes that's the only time that someone's listened to them and they feel like they haven't been heard. And so that's what I think where all of us can make a big impact in our communities just by listening. The two ears, one mouth rule that my dad, helped me learn.
Representative Clancy, we appreciate your time. We recognize that you've been on duty all night. You came here this morning and spent time with us. And at some point, you're going to have to sleep. So we hope that you can go and do that. And Mary, I see you over there. I haven't forgotten you. You're over there quietly taking this in.
I'm listening. I'm doing more listening than speaking.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're analyzing us.
I was going to say.
She's an intelligence analyst, and
yes.
I'm wondering if you've had any indication of any kind of intelligence whatsoever out of this group.
Scanning it.
Do you see any? I don't know. Maybe she doesn't.
I do. I mean, honestly, I gotta say, as a law enforcement officer, you speak good. You speak gooder than most.
I speak gooder.
You speak gooder than most.
Yeah.
But I do have to say, I have far more respect for someone who is in that political realm, who has background in the public service. And I think at least for me, most of that political realm it's usually just a name and a face. But for someone to actually sit down with people in the community and listen to them, I feel like that's a critical part of it.
I think we'll leave that last word with Professor Kent. Thank you for being here, and thank you for contributing to our last episode as well. And for all of you listening to us, again, as always, we care about you. We know you're out there. We know you're working hard, and you're working on important things that matter to our communities, that matter in your lives and in the lives of the members of your family. So be safe out there, and we'll see you next time.